My sister was locked in a basement by her own son. He left her there to vanish. And he texted me asking where she was. I smelled it the second I walked through the front door. That wrong smell. Not rot, not gas, nothing you could name immediately and act on. Just air that hadn't moved in days, stale and still and close in the way that a house goes still when the person who lives in it has stopped moving through it. I've worked in hospitals for 22 years. I know what absence smells like. It smells like that. Charlene? My voice went into the hallway and came back to me empty. The curtains were drawn. That was the first wrong thing. Charlene pulled her curtains open every morning at 7, without fail, because our mother had done it, and our mother's mother before that. Some deep domestic religion about letting the light in that Charlene had inherited completely, and I had not at all. Drawn curtains at 11 in the morning in June meant something was wrong. I moved into the kitchen, dishes in the sink. 3 days of them, maybe 4. The kind of accumulation that happens when someone stops caring or stops being able to care. A mug with coffee dried to a dark ring at the bottom. A bowl with something that had been oatmeal. And then I saw the counter, her diabetes kit, her glucometer, her lancets, her test strips, all of it arranged in the precise little order she kept them in. The order she'd maintained every single morning for 9 years since her type 1 diagnosis. Charlene Mitchell tested her blood sugar every morning without exception. Her endocrinologist, Dr. Priya Mehta at St. Francis, had told me once that Charlene was her most compliant patient in 14 years of practice. 3 kits on the counter, all sealed, all untouched. 3 days. I stood there with my keys still in my hand and my stomach somewhere on the floor, and I heard it. 3 knocks. Weak, from below, from the basement. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what I did next, because who I am matters to how this story ends. My name is Gail Avery. I'm 54 years old. I've been a head nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center in Hartford for 11 years and a registered nurse for 22 before that. I specialize in trauma and acute care. I have seen things in those wards that I will take to my grave, and I say that not to sound dramatic, but to establish something important. I do not panic. It was trained out of me a long time ago, replaced with a specific kind of cold clarity that arrives when everything is wrong and someone needs you to be the person who is not falling apart. Charlene is my younger sister by 4 years. She's 50. She raised her son John alone after her husband Robert died 5 years ago. A fall from the roof of their house, a loose ladder, an accident that the whole family grieved and then quietly folded away. She is gentle in the way that certain people are genuinely, fundamentally gentle. Not a performance of softness, but the real thing. The kind that makes her easy to love and, I understood now as I stood in her kitchen, easy to hurt. John Mitchell is 31, Charlene's only child, Robert's son. He'd moved back into the house 8 months ago, after a job loss he'd described vaguely, and a lease situation he'd described even more vaguely. And Charlene had said yes because Charlene always said yes to John, and because she was lonely in that house, and because Robert's life insurance settlement, $340,000, held in a managed account, was the kind of money that needed someone to help oversee it, and John had volunteered. I hadn't trusted that arrangement from the start. I hadn't said so loudly enough. That's the thing I'll carry. The basement door stopped me cold, not because it was locked, though it was, because it was new. A heavy steel core door where the old hollow wooden one used to be, with an industrial padlock on the outside, the kind you buy at a hardware store when you want something that will not come open accidentally. The hinges were new. The frame had been recently reinforced. I could see the fresh wood filler around the screws, still slightly pale against the older paint. Someone had installed this door deliberately, recently, from the outside. Robert's old toolbox was in the hall closet. I found a wrench, a 16-inch Craftsman that Robert had owned for 30 years, heavy and solid and reliable. I broke the padlock in 2 strikes. It wasn't elegant, it was effective. I yanked the door open. The air that came up the stairs was stale and warm and close. No windows, no ventilation, the kind of air that collects in a sealed space over days and starts to change character. I took the stairs and found my sister on a thin camping mattress behind a stack of cardboard boxes, barely conscious, her lips cracked white at the corners, her skin dry and papery in a way that I recognized before my brain had finished processing what I was seeing. Diabetic ketoacidosis, advanced. 3 days minimum, possibly 4. One more day, and I would have been attending a funeral. Charlene. I dropped to my knees beside her, 2 fingers to her neck, pulse rapid and weak, the thready quality that tells you the body is working very hard at something it's losing ground on. I'm here. I've got you. Can you hear me? Her eyes opened. It took a moment for them to find my face. Gail. Her voice was barely there, a husk of a voice. Don't talk. I'm calling 911. John, she said. He said he needed Dad's insurance. Don't talk, I said again. My voice was steady. My hands were steady. My chest felt like someone had their fist in it. He took my phone, she said. He took my insulin. I dialed 911 and kept my hand on her wrist the entire time. The paramedics were there in 6 minutes. I know because I counted. Rodrigo Jimenez and Amber Walsh. I got their names because I always get names, because names matter, and because in my experience, the people whose names you know are the people who will show up when you need them to. They were good. They moved fast, and they didn't ask me unnecessary questions when I told them what I was looking at, because competent paramedics know when the person giving them information knows what they're talking about. Charlene was on a gurney and in the ambulance in under 8 minutes. I climbed in with her. I held her hand with one of mine, and with the other, I opened my phone. There was a text. John Mitchell, 10:23 a.m. at Dad's place going through some boxes. Where's Mom? She's not picking up. The casual tone. The completely, utterly casual tone of a man wondering what was for lunch, like he'd misplaced a set of keys. Like his mother was a mild inconvenience whose whereabouts were a minor administrative matter. My hands, which had been steady in the basement and steady when I called 911 and steady in the ambulance, went still in a different way now. Not shaking, crystallized. The stillness that comes just before something very precise and very permanent. I typed back, "She's with me. Don't wait up." Then I called Detective Elaine Cortez. I want to explain Elaine Cortez because she matters to this story in ways that go beyond the professional. Detective Elaine Cortez had been with the Hartford PD for 16 years, the last 8 of them in the Family Crimes Division. I'd met her through St. Mary's. Nurses in trauma and acute care cross paths with detectives the way mailmen cross paths with dogs, regularly and not always comfortably, because we see the same patients from different angles, and we don't always agree on what we're seeing. Elaine and I had disagreed 3 times over 12 years, and been right together more times than I could count. She was 51, built like someone who had decided long ago that the world was not going to move her, and she had a particular quality that I valued above almost any other in a professional context. She listened to the whole sentence before she started forming her response. "My nephew locked my sister in her basement," I told her. 3 days without medication. She's in DKA. The paramedics are with her now. I need you. A pause. Not uncertainty. Elaine didn't pause from uncertainty. She paused to make sure she had it right. "St. Mary's?" she said. "St. Francis. We're en route. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 17. Charlene was admitted to the ICU at St. Francis at 12:08 p.m. Dr. Marcus Webb, internal medicine, 15 years of practice, the attending who took her case, came out to talk to me at 1:30. He was direct in the way good doctors are direct, which is to say he told me exactly how bad it had been without making it performative. "Her A1C suggests prolonged hyperglycemic stress," he said, "consistent with 3 to 4 days of insulin deprivation. Another 12 hours and we'd be having a very different conversation." I nodded. "There are also signs of dehydration consistent with limited fluid intake. She had approximately 1 liter of water available to her." He paused. "This wasn't an accident, Ms. Avery." "I know," I said. "I'm required to file a report with Detective Cortez is already here," I said. "She's aware." He looked at me for a moment with the expression doctors get when they realize the person they're talking to is also a medical professional who has already done the clinical math. "She's stable," he said. "She'll recover fully if there are no complications." I said thank you and went to find Elaine. John arrived at the hospital at 3:47 p.m. He looked perfect. That's the word I keep coming back to. Perfect. Expensive sneakers, a designer hoodie in a muted olive green, hair that suggested he'd taken a moment before coming in, the face of a worried son, constructed with the precision of someone who has thought about what a worried son looks like and decided to become one for the afternoon. He stood up when he saw me in the waiting area. "Aunt Gail." His voice had exactly the right quality of relief mixed with anxiety, the specific emotional key of someone who has been worried and is now hoping for good news. "What happened? Is she okay? Why can't I see her?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I sat down across from him at one of the cafeteria tables, and I put my hands flat on the surface, and I used the voice I use when I'm delivering information to a patient's family. Clinical, unhurried, specific. "We found her in your basement," I said. "Padlocked in. 3 to 4 days without medication or adequate water." He did confusion very well. His brow creased, his head tilted slightly, his eyes went wide with the particular blankness of someone receiving information that doesn't compute. "The basement? Mom never goes down there. She's not supposed to use the stairs. She was on a mattress behind your storage boxes." A pause. Very brief, less than a second. "But I've been watching people process information for 22 years, and I know the difference between someone who is confused and someone who is calculating, and what moved across John Mitchell's face in that fraction of a second was not confusion. Someone must have broken in," he said. "Did they hurt her? Have you called the police? Because she regained consciousness in the ambulance," I said. "She was able to speak. She told us what happened." Something shifted. The confusion performance became something else. Not panic, not grief. The word that came to me was recalibration, like a computer running a new scenario. "You know how she gets," he said. His voice had dropped slightly, gone softer, more intimate, the voice of a concerned family member talking to another concerned family member, trying to find common ground. "When her blood sugar crashes, she gets confused. She's said things before that didn't make sense, that she didn't even remember afterward. I'd hate for her disorientation to be mistaken for 3 days of test kits," I said. "All sealed, still in their packaging. Dr. Webb has documented everything. The dehydration is consistent with access to less than 1 liter of water over approximately 72 hours. He leaned forward, and he dropped his voice to something almost gentle. "Be careful, Aunt Gail," he said. "Accidents happen to people who get too involved in things that don't concern them." He smiled when he said it. A small smile, almost collegial, like we were discussing traffic. We were sitting in a hospital cafeteria. There were 17 other people in the room. There were 4 security cameras that I had identified when I sat down, which is something I did deliberately, and Detective Elaine Cortez was 40 feet away in the corridor outside, which John did not know. I looked at my nephew across the table. "Thank you," I said. "I'll keep that in mind." Then I stood up and I walked away, and I did not let my hands shake until I was around the corner and out of his his sightline. I spent that night in a chair beside Charlene's bed. The ICU at St. Francis runs on a particular rhythm at night. The soft percussion of monitors, the measured footsteps of the night staff, the quality of light that is never quite dark and never quite bright. I know that rhythm. I've spent 22 years inside versions of it. That night it felt different. That night it felt like the rhythm of a place where something had almost ended and hadn't. Charlene slept until about 2 a.m. Then her eyes opened and she looked at the ceiling for a while, and then she looked at me. "You stayed?" she said. "Of course." She was quiet for a long time. The monitor kept its steady count. "There's something else," she said finally. Her voice was stronger than it had been in the ambulance, but still careful. The way voices are when you're choosing each word deliberately. "About Robert." I went very still. "He didn't fall," she said. The room didn't change. The monitor kept its count. The night staff moved in the corridor. But something in my chest went cold and quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the air temperature. "Charlene, I was in the garden. I could see the roofline." She closed her eyes. Not in distress. In the specific way people close their eyes when they're making themselves look at something they've been not looking at for a long time. They were arguing. John was up there with him. They'd been arguing for days about the money, Robert's policy. John wanted an advance. Robert said no. A breath. I saw John's arm go out. Once. Robert grabbed for the ladder. "Charlene, why didn't you?" John was so distraught. He cried for 3 days. He organized the funeral. He sat with me for weeks. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. I convinced myself I imagined it. It was easier. He was all I had left. 5 years. She'd carried this for 5 years. And he'd known she'd seen it. He'd known, and he'd kept her close. And he'd been managing her isolation and her finances and her silence with the patience of someone who understood that a secret kept through fear is just as good as a secret kept through loyalty, until the money got close enough to touch and patience stopped being sufficient. I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair and I breathed and I waited for morning. Detective Cortez came back at 9 a.m. She had Margaret Osei with her. Margaret was the Hartford County DA's victim advocate, a compact woman in her late 40s with natural hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain, who had been working family violence cases for 19 years and had the particular quality of someone who has sat beside a lot of people in a lot of terrible moments and found a way to be useful in all of them. They pulled chairs to Charlene's bedside and they listened. Margaret took notes in a small leather notebook. Elaine recorded with Charlene's explicit consent. She read the consent language carefully, and Charlene said yes clearly on the record. Charlene told them everything. The basement, the insulin, the phone taken from her nightstand 3 days ago when John told her he needed to ask her something. Something about the insurance account. Something about a transfer he needed her to authorize. And when she'd said she needed to think about it, when she'd said she wanted to call me first. The door. The lock. "He said he'd be back in a day or two," Charlene said. "He said by then I'd have had time to think it through." Margaret set her pen down very quietly. "He said," Charlene stopped, composed herself. "He said I could have my phone back when I was ready to sign." The room was silent. Elaine's jaw was set in the way it gets when she's filed something away into the category of things that she will personally make sure are addressed. I've seen that jaw set before. It's a reassuring sight from where I'm standing. "There's more," I said, and I told them about Robert. I want to describe what happened next carefully because accuracy matters here. Detective Cortez left the room at 10:17 a.m. She made 2 phone calls in the corridor that I could not hear. She came back in at 10:52 and sat down and told us in the measured voice she uses when the information is significant and the delivery needs to be controlled that she had contacted the medical examiner's office regarding Robert Mitchell's death in June of 2019. "Given the new testimony," she said, "we have grounds to request a review of the original examination." "How long does that take?" I asked. "In a case where there's new witness testimony and a related active incident?" She paused. "Not as long as you'd think." She was right. Dr. Howard Chin, the Hartford County Deputy Medical Examiner, forensic pathology, 23 years of practice, a precise and careful man who I knew by reputation from St. Mary's, completed his review of the original post-mortem findings and issued a supplemental report 48 hours later. Robert Mitchell's hands had defensive wounds, abrasions on the palms consistent with grabbing a rough surface under sudden lateral force. They had been noted in the original examination as consistent with a fall and classified as incidental. In the context of new testimony describing a physical altercation immediately preceding the fall, Dr. Chin wrote in his supplemental report, "The pattern of injuries is more consistent with a defensive response to external force than with a passive fall. Probable homicide." John was brought in for questioning on the morning of day 3. He wore khakis and a blue button-down to the interview. I noticed that because I was there. Elaine had allowed me to observe through the glass, a professional courtesy I understood the weight of. He looked like a man attending a routine business meeting. He sat with his hands flat on the table, relaxed, the posture of someone who has decided that confidence is its own kind of evidence. Elaine was good. She was very good. She built the interview slowly, starting with logistics and timelines, letting John settle into his own performance, letting him get comfortable with the sound of his own reasonable voice explaining reasonable things. John said he'd been away for the weekend. He said his mother sometimes went downstairs to look for things and must have become disoriented. He said the door, the new door, the steel core door with the external padlock, had been installed because there was a problem with neighborhood kids getting into the property through the basement window, and he was just being security conscious. He said the padlock must have engaged accidentally. He said all of this this with the smooth, unhurried confidence of someone who has rehearsed. Then Elaine put the insurance documents on the table. The transfer authorizations, 4 of them, totaling $280,000 of Robert's $340,000 settlement, moved from Charlene's managed account to a holding company registered in Delaware in John's name over the past 14 months. Patricia Nolan, a forensic accountant with Nolan Financial Investigations, who Elaine had engaged 2 days earlier, had spent 40 hours reconstructing the transaction trail. It was, Patricia had told Elaine, not especially sophisticated. John had been telling Charlene these were routine reinvestment moves, Patricia had said on the phone when Elaine conferenced me in. He controlled her online banking access. She trusted him. $280,000. The remaining $60,000 was still in the account. He'd needed Charlene's signature for the final transfer. She'd said she wanted to call her sister first, and he'd put her in the basement. John stared at the documents on the table. The performance didn't end suddenly. It ended slowly, the way a light source dims rather than cuts, the edges of the confident posture softening, the set of the jaw becoming something else, the particular quality of his attention changing from calculated to something colder and more private. "I want a lawyer," he said. "Of course," Elaine said. She gathered the documents without hurry. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "The medical examiner's supplemental report on your father's death came in this morning," she said, "just so you're aware." John Mitchell went very still. Charlene was discharged from St. Francis on the 4th day. I drove her to my house, not hers. Hers was a crime scene. And also, it was a house that now held things she wasn't ready to walk back into yet. A basement with a new door and a thin mattress and 5 years of a secret she'd kept because she loved someone who didn't deserve it. She sat in my passenger seat with her hands in her lap and watched Hartford move past the window. And I drove and didn't fill the silence with anything because some silences don't need filling. When we got to my house, she sat at my kitchen table while I made tea, and she said, without turning around, "I should have called you sooner, about all of it." "Yes," I said. "I kept thinking he'd be better, that the next thing would be the last thing." "I know. He was Robert's son," she said. "He looked like Robert. He laughed like Robert. I kept seeing Robert when I looked at him and I kept thinking." She stopped. I put the tea in front of her and sat down across from her. "He was never Robert," I said. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "No," she said. "He wasn't." John Mitchell was charged on the following counts: unlawful imprisonment, elder abuse, criminal neglect causing bodily harm, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and, following a grand jury review of Dr. A. Chin's supplemental report and Charlene's testimony, second-degree murder in the death of Robert Allen Mitchell. The financial exploitation charge alone carried a potential sentence of 15 years under Connecticut statute. The murder charge was a different conversation entirely. He retained a defense attorney named Gerald Fitch, expensive, experienced, the kind of attorney that $280,000 in a Delaware holding company can buy. Gerald Fitch was good at his job. He was not, however, good enough to make the security camera footage from the hospital cafeteria disappear, or the padlock, or the new door with its fresh-filled hinges, or 3 sealed diabetes kits on a kitchen counter, or Dr. Howard Chin's supplemental report, or Patricia Nolan's 40 hours of financial forensics, or Charlene's testimony, which she gave at the grand jury with steady hands and a steady voice, and without looking away. The trial is scheduled. I won't know the outcome before this is finished, so I can't tell you what the jury decided. What I can tell you is what I know. I know that John sat across a conference table from his mother 3 weeks after his arrest, in a meeting his attorney requested and Elaine permitted with conditions. Recorded, monitored, Charlene's choice entirely. I know that he tried one final time to perform the reasonable worried son, to suggest that there had been a misunderstanding, that things had gotten out of hand, that surely they could find a way through this that didn't have to end so badly for everyone. I was behind the glass. I watched Charlene let him finish. Then she looked at her son across the table, this man she had given birth to, nursed through fevers, driven to practice, loved with the particular ferocious tenderness that a woman loves an only child, and she said very quietly, "I watched you push Robert off that roof." The performance stopped. For one moment, unguarded and unperformed, something looked back at us from behind John Mitchell's face that was not a worried son, or a reasonable man, or anything that I would describe with a warm word. Then the door opened, and 2 officers came in, and the cuffs came out, and I watched my sister sit straight in her chair and not look away from her son's face as it happened. "This is what consequence looks like, John," she said. "You should have learned it a long time ago." The thing about working in trauma care for 22 years is that you learn something about survival that they don't teach you in nursing school. Survival isn't the moment the crisis ends. Survival is the morning after, and the morning after that, and the slow, ordinary accumulation of days in which you eat breakfast, and drink tea and sit in someone's kitchen, and figure out what you're going to do with the life you almost lost. Charlene moved into the guest room of my house for 2 months. She tested her blood sugar every morning at 7 and pulled the curtains open to let the light in, and those 2 facts together, the precision and the ritual and the stubbornness of her living, made me love her in a way I didn't know how to say out loud, so I just made sure the tea was ready when she came downstairs. The managed account was frozen pending recovery proceedings. Patricia Nolan estimated that a significant portion of the $280,000 was recoverable through the Delaware holding company's assets. Charlene hired an estate attorney named Rose Kimura to manage that process. Rose was efficient, experienced, and had the particular satisfaction of someone who enjoys untangling things that other people have deliberately tangled. Robert's house sold 8 months later. Charlene bought a condo near mine, on the 3rd floor, with south-facing windows. She said she wanted the light. I go back to the basement sometimes, in my head. Not in a way that hurts, exactly. More in the way you return to any place that changed something fundamental, just to look at it again from the other side. I go back to the smell at the front door, to the 3 sealed kits on the counter, to the wrench in my hand and the 2 strikes that broke the lock, to the air at the top of the stairs. And I go back to Charlene on the mattress, her eyes finding my face in the dark. She said my name. That was the first thing she said. Not help, not please, just my name. Like the answer to a question she'd been holding for 3 days. I've been a head nurse for 11 years. I've responded to a lot of emergencies, and I understand the mechanics of crisis response, the adrenaline, the training, the clinical distance that lets you do what needs doing without falling apart in the middle of it. But I want to be honest about something. When Charlene said my name in the dark, I did not feel clinical. I felt the exact opposite of clinical. I felt every year of her being my younger sister, every disagreement and every phone call and every Christmas and every ordinary Tuesday, all of it landing at once in that basement. I didn't fall apart. I didn't have time, but I felt it. And later, when she was stable and sleeping and the monitors were doing their steady work, I went to the family bathroom down the hall from the ICU, and I sat on the floor with my back against the door for about 6 minutes. Then I washed my face and went back to her room. That's the job. That's always been the job. She's safe now. That's all that matters.